You think we're going to bail you out, Jenna? You made your bed, now lie in it. My mother's words cut through me like ice, and I could hear my brother Cody snickering in the background. I was 29, heartbroken and completely alone. Brendan, the man I thought I could trust, had walked away, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a life turned upside down. I had nowhere to turn, and in a moment of desperation, I called my family. I thought maybe they would help me, just this once. But instead, I was met with laughter, scorn, and cold dismissal. Valerie, my mother, looked at me as if I had failed not only in marriage, but in life itself. Cody, as always, seemed to enjoy my pain, his smug grin piercing every ounce of dignity I had left. My father, Gary, said nothing. He just stood there, silent, letting the cruelty pass as if it weren't happening. That moment was a turning point. I realized I could not rely on anyone. If I wanted to survive, I had to fight alone. I moved into my car for a few weeks, the humiliation gnawing at me, yet sparking something inside me I hadn't known before, a silent, burning determination. I vowed I would never let anyone control my life again, never let anyone's cruelty define me. I took on extra work, night shifts cleaning offices, and spent every spare moment studying for my real estate license. The road was hard, but I was determined. Every rejection and every long, lonely night made me stronger. Eventually, I found Marlene, a tough, no-nonsense broker who saw something in me. She became my mentor, teaching me the ins and outs of commercial real estate, the lessons no book could offer. Under her guidance, I worked relentlessly, flipping distressed properties, closing deals, and building a reputation as someone tough but fair. I didn't just survive, I thrived. By 35, I owned a boutique real estate firm and had purchased my dream home, a sprawling modern estate tucked into the hills. I had everything my family once laughed at me for not having. And then one day, the intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked, there they were. Gary, shrunken and hesitant. Valerie, worry etched deep into her face. And Cody, usually so arrogant, now desperate and anxious. They had fallen on hard times, their so-called stability crumbling. They came to me because they had nowhere else to turn. I let them into my driveway, not my home, and listened calmly as they poured out their troubles. I reminded them of their words from 6 years ago, the laughter and mockery I had endured. I offered a form of help that mirrored their own callousness, lists of shelters, budget motels, and advice to manage money wisely. They left shell-shocked, humiliated, and I felt no triumph, only quiet peace. I closed my door behind me, knowing my life was now fully my own, defined by my strength and independence, not by their betrayal. I sat in my car, staring at the dark street, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. The past few weeks had been the hardest of my life. I had no home, no husband, and no family willing to help me. Every laugh, every harsh word from my mother and brother replayed in my mind. I felt small, invisible, and ashamed. But in that darkness, something inside me shifted. I made a promise to myself, quiet but firm. I would never depend on anyone again. If I wanted to survive, I had to rely on my own strength. The days were long, and the nights even longer. I worked a small job during the day, barely making enough to cover food, and then took on a second job cleaning offices at night. The work was exhausting, my body ached constantly, but I kept going. Every mop, every sweep of the floor reminded me that I was fighting for something bigger. I had a goal, and I refused to let despair win. When the cleaning shift ended, I would sit in my car with a small lamp and a stack of books for my real estate exam. The words blurred sometimes, and my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep studying. Each page was a step toward freedom, a step toward building a life that no one could take from me. I thought about how it would feel to succeed without needing anyone else's approval or help. That thought gave me strength I didn't know I had. Some nights, I cried quietly in the car, letting the sadness out, but I never let it stop me. I reminded myself that every hard night, every cold hour spent alone, was preparing me for something better. I imagined myself walking into an office one day as a professional, confident, and respected, someone who had earned everything on her own. That vision kept me moving forward when my body and mind screamed for rest. Even in the silence and loneliness, I learned to trust myself. I learned that no one else could fight my battles for me. I didn't need their approval or sympathy. Every small victory, like passing a chapter of the exam or saving a few dollars from my cleaning job, became a reason to keep going. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the promise I had made to myself in that dark car began to take shape. I was building not just knowledge or money, but courage, patience, and determination. The humiliation and pain from my past became fuel rather than chains. I learned that the hardest times could create the strongest people. And I knew deep down that the life I wanted, one built on my own effort, my own decisions, was waiting for me. I stayed focused, determined, and alone, but I was no longer afraid of the darkness. It had taught me the most important lesson. I could survive, I could rise, and I could do it all on my own. I was exhausted, but I refused to give up. After months of juggling multiple jobs and late-night studying, I finally landed a temporary position at a property management firm. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a way to get closer to the real estate world I had been dreaming about. I showed up early every day, eager to learn, and stayed late whenever I could, taking on extra tasks without complaint. I wanted to prove myself, and I hoped someone would notice my effort. Marlene, a senior broker at the firm, was known for being strict and demanding. She had little patience for people who made excuses or didn't work hard. But I could tell she was watching me closely. I worked carefully, asked questions, and tackled every task with attention and determination. I noticed her observing how I handled files, clients, and problems, and I tried to do everything perfectly. One afternoon, she called me into her office. My heart raced. I wondered if I had done something wrong. But she studied me for a moment and said, "You've got potential. I don't take on many people, but I think you can handle this. Stick with me, and I'll teach you how real commercial real estate really works." I could hardly believe it. This was the break I had been waiting for, the chance to turn all my hard work into something that could change my life. From that moment, Marlene became more than a boss. She became my mentor. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had. She taught me how to read a property's value, negotiate deals, and understand the complicated world of commercial real estate. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Whenever I made a mistake, she pointed it out and expected me to fix it quickly. At first, I was intimidated and doubted myself, but I knew I had to rise to the challenge. Under her guidance, I began to grow in confidence. I learned to handle tough clients and spot opportunities others might miss. Marlene encouraged me to take initiative, think strategically, and trust my instincts. I soaked up every lesson and slowly started seeing results. Each small win gave me more energy and motivation. I realized that success in this world required more than hard work. It required courage, sharp thinking, and persistence. Marlene showed me all of that. With her as my guide, I wasn't just struggling to survive anymore. I was stepping into a new life that I could shape for myself. This mentorship became the foundation of everything I was about to achieve, and I knew it was just the beginning of the life I was determined to build. After I started learning from Marlene, my life became even harder, but I was determined. I worked long hours, often 80 hours a week, juggling multiple jobs and studying at night. My small apartment felt more like a shoebox than a home, but I didn't mind. Every penny I earned went into my savings, every extra hour into learning something new. I knew that sacrifices now would pay off later, and I focused on the goal ahead. Some days, I was exhausted to the point of tears, but I refused to give up. I reminded myself that each challenge was preparing me for the life I wanted. I worked with clients, made calls, sent emails, and learned everything I could about the real estate business. Each small task felt like a step forward, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. I kept a strict routine and stayed disciplined, knowing that discipline would bring me closer to the future I dreamed of. Then came my first major deal. The feeling was electric. After all those long hours, all the struggle, finally something tangible happened. I closed the deal and saw the reward for my efforts. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I could do this. I was capable, smart, and strong. That first success motivated me to keep going. Soon, I closed another deal, then another, and slowly the glimmer of success became real. The distant dream I had carried in my mind for years was no longer just a hope. It was coming true. Even as I achieved these wins, I made a conscious choice. I cut off all contact with my family. I didn't need them to see me succeed. I let them believe I was still struggling, living in the same situation they had laughed at years ago. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't want their interference. My focus was on myself, my growth, and my future. Living like this wasn't easy. There were days I felt lonely, frustrated, and exhausted. But every small victory reminded me that I was moving in the right direction. Every deal I closed, every dollar saved, every lesson learned became part of the foundation for the life I was building. I began to trust myself more, believe in my abilities, and see a future where I could finally be free from the past. I kept pushing, kept sacrificing, and kept believing. The hard work, long hours, and small apartment no longer felt like burdens. They were steps leading me to my dreams. The glimmer of success was bright now, a shining light guiding me through the long grind. I had learned that nothing worth having comes easy, and that patience, persistence, and focus would turn my vision into reality. I was no longer a person defined by failure or family judgment. I was someone creating her own path, one determined step at a time. By the time I turned 35, my life had completely changed. I was no longer the tired, struggling woman living in a tiny apartment. I had survived years of hard work, late nights, and constant challenges, and now I was thriving. I decided it was time to take full control of my future, so I started my own boutique commercial real estate firm. It was scary at first, starting something from scratch always is, but I had learned so much from Marlene and from my own experiences. I knew how to spot opportunities, handle negotiations, and make smart decisions. At first, I focused on small projects. I bought distressed properties, ones that others had given up on or thought were too difficult to fix. I would carefully study each building, plan renovations, and find tenants or buyers who could see the potential. Slowly, those small projects began to turn into profit. Each successful deal gave me more confidence and more capital to invest in the next opportunity. I started building a small fortune, and with each step, my reputation grew. People in the business began to notice me, not just for the money I was making, but for the way I handled everything. I was known as someone tough, precise, and fair, someone who could get the job done without cutting corners or taking advantage of others. Running my own firm was not easy. Every day was a challenge, filled with negotiations, inspections, paperwork, and decisions that could make or break a deal. But I loved it. I loved the feeling of controlling my own destiny, of seeing a property that others had ignored turn into something valuable. I loved knowing that my success was the result of my effort, my planning, and my determination. I also learned to trust my instincts more. Marlene had taught me the rules of the game, but experience taught me when to take risks and when to be careful. I learned to balance caution with boldness, and it paid off. Each property I flipped, each client I satisfied, strengthened my position in the business. People started reaching out to me for advice and partnerships. My firm was growing steadily, and I could see the empire I had dreamed about slowly rising from the ashes of my past struggles. Through all of this, I never forgot why I started. I had been rejected, laughed at, and abandoned, but that had fueled my determination. Now, standing in my office, seeing my team work hard and my properties thriving, I felt a deep sense of pride. I had turned pain into power, struggle into success, and dreams into reality. I had built something lasting, something that no one could take from me. My life was no longer defined by the past. It was defined by what I had created, by my strength, and by my ability to rise above every challenge. I had built my own empire, and it was just the beginning. I was in my new home, a sprawling modern estate tucked into the hills, enjoying a rare quiet afternoon when the intercom buzzed. I frowned, surprised to see a visitor at this hour. Pressing the button, I heard a familiar, hesitant voice. My heart skipped. It was my family. I stepped out to the gate, and the sight of them made me pause. My father, Gary, looked older and smaller, as if life had worn him down. My mother, Valerie, usually so sharp and commanding, now had worry written across every line of her face. And Cody, my brother, who always carried that smug arrogance, looked tense and nervous. The confidence that had annoyed me for so long was gone, replaced by something I had never seen before, desperation. I could tell they had heard about me, about my success. I had kept my distance from them all these years, letting them believe I was still struggling. But now, standing in front of me, I realized the news had reached them, and it had shaken their world. They had come because they had nowhere else to go, not because they wanted to reconnect or apologize, but because they needed something from me. I didn't rush to open the gate fully. I let them step just inside the driveway, keeping them at a distance. I wanted to see them clearly, to understand the change in them. The years of laughter, mockery, and coldness they had shown me came flooding back, and I realized just how different the roles had reversed. They were no longer in control. I was. Seeing them like this gave me a strange mixture of feelings. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, the quiet pride of knowing I had built this life on my own. Another part of me felt a sharp twinge of sadness, thinking of what had once been a family that should have supported me. But I reminded myself that this moment was not about old feelings. It was about the reality in front of me. I stayed calm as they looked around, taking in the estate, the cars, and the gardens. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the questions they were too afraid to ask aloud. They had come expecting help, expecting my kindness, but I was not the same person they had once dismissed. I had worked, struggled, and built everything on my own. As I watched them, I realized the power had shifted. I no longer needed their approval, their guidance, or their pity. I had earned every bit of this life, and I would decide what they deserved, if anything, from me. The buzzing of the intercom had started this encounter, but now, at the gate, I knew the story had changed. They were no longer the ones in control. I was, and I would make sure they understood that before this day ended. I stayed at the gate, watching them carefully as they stepped onto my driveway. I let them come closer, but I didn't invite them inside. My home was mine, built from years of struggle and hard work, and I wasn't about to hand that over. They stood there, shifting nervously, unsure of what to say. The arrogance I remembered in Cody was gone. He looked smaller, defeated, and even my mother, usually so composed, seemed uncertain and worried. My father, Gary, kept his eyes down, looking as though the weight of life had finally pressed him into silence. Finally, Cody spoke, his voice trembling slightly. He told me about the collapse of his tech startup, the one he had bragged about for years as can't fail. The truth came out like a punch to the gut. He had lost everything, and in the process, he had wiped out Mom and Dad's retirement savings. Their financial security was gone. I listened quietly, letting the words sink in. I could see the shame in their faces, the desperation in their voices. Valerie, my mother, added that they were drowning in debt and that the family home was at risk of foreclosure. She tried to explain their mistakes, the bad choices, and the timing of everything, but the fear in her eyes said more than words ever could. They had no one else to turn to, no backup plan, and now they had come to me. I could feel the shift in power clearly. For years, they had ignored my pain, laughed at my struggles, and refused to help. And now the roles had reversed. I studied their faces carefully, noticing how their confidence had crumbled. Cody looked anxious, almost like a child who had just been caught doing something wrong. My mother's worry was deep and raw, and my father seemed tired beyond belief. They had come expecting compassion, maybe forgiveness, maybe a lifeline, but I didn't feel rushed to offer any. I let them speak, letting them reveal the full extent of their troubles without interruption. Hearing their story made me reflect on how far I had come. I remembered my own days of struggle, the nights I spent exhausted and alone, the sacrifices I had made to build a life that no one thought I could achieve. I realized that this moment was a chance to see justice in a quiet, calm way. They had come to me because they had nowhere else to go, and now it was clear who had the power. As they finished explaining, the air between us was heavy with tension. I felt neither anger nor pity. I simply stood there, absorbing the truth. They had made their mistakes, and now they were forced to face the consequences. For the first time, they understood what it felt like to be helpless, to have nowhere to turn. And I, the one they once scorned, was the person standing above it all, fully in control of what would happen next. I listened quietly as they spoke, letting them finish without interrupting. I could see the desperation in their eyes, the tension in their shoulders, and I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every word hit its mark. I started with my mother. "You told me to lie in the bed I made," I said, my voice steady. I watched her flinch, the memory of her icy laughter from years ago reflected in her eyes. I reminded her of the exact words she had spoken when I begged for help, when I was broken and desperate. She had no mercy for me then, and now she had to hear them back. Turning to Cody, I continued, "You told me to get a third job. You laughed at me when I worked myself to exhaustion, telling me I wasn't trying hard enough. You mocked me, and you left me to figure things out alone." His head lowered, and I could see the shame building inside him. The arrogance he once carried had vanished, replaced by fear and regret. Then I looked at my father, who had been silent for so long. "And you, Dad, you said nothing." His quietness had hurt me as much as their harsh words. He had been there, seeing it all happen, yet he did not step in, did not offer help, did not even speak up for me. His silence had felt like approval of their cruelty, and now he could see the weight of what he had allowed. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small journal I had kept all these years. I had written down every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every piece of advice disguised as contempt. I showed it to them, page by page, and watched as their faces fell, realizing that nothing had been forgotten. I had remembered everything, every detail, and now it was clear that their actions had consequences. "This," I said, holding the journal firmly, "is the life you forced me to survive. Every insult, every laugh, every rejection has brought us to this moment. You told me to figure it out alone. You told me I was on my own. And now you are here, facing your own mistakes, lying in the bed you made." I could see the disbelief and regret on their faces. They had expected me to forgive easily, to open the doors of my life without question. But I had waited all these years to show them that their actions had meaning. I was calm, composed, and in control, and I wanted them to understand the full weight of what they had done. For the first time, they understood that I had not only survived but had become stronger because of their cruelty. They were forced to face reality, and the tables had turned completely. I had been patient, careful, and just. The reckoning had come, and I stood tall, knowing that this was the moment when the past finally met the present and justice, quiet and firm, had been served. I watched them closely, seeing the fear and desperation in their eyes. They had come to me expecting sympathy, maybe forgiveness, maybe a way out of their problems. But I had no intention of giving them an easy escape. Instead, I decided to show them the same kind of help they had offered me years ago when I was struggling, and they had laughed. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a list I had carefully prepared. It included local homeless shelters, budget motels, and community centers that offered assistance. I handed it to my mother first, Valerie, and she took it with shaking hands, her face pale. I made sure to look her in the eye as I said, "This should help you get through the next few weeks. Just like you suggested I figure things out back then." Cody looked at me, confused and nervous. I could see that he realized this was no ordinary response. I handed him a note with job listings, including positions at the local grocery store. "Maybe start here," I said calmly. "It could be a good chance to get back on your feet. And perhaps it will teach you how to manage money better this time." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw him speechless. Gary, my father, simply stood there, looking down at the folder I had handed him. I didn't say much to him. Silence spoke louder than words. He had always said nothing when I needed support, and now he was forced to face the reality of receiving the same kind of cold, practical help he had once ignored. They shuffled through the materials, their confidence gone. The arrogance they had carried for so long had been replaced by shame and a sense of helplessness. I didn't gloat or yell. I didn't need to. The poetic justice was already working. They had treated me as if I had no value, and now they were forced to accept a reality I had designed with precision. As they looked at the list, I spoke again, my voice calm but firm. "I hope this helps you. It's not much, but it's something. You wanted me to figure things out alone, and now it's your turn." They couldn't argue, couldn't blame anyone else. Every word I had spoken years ago, every laugh, every cold comment, they were living it now. I stepped back and watched them for a moment. They looked small, anxious, and unsure. Their mistakes had caught up with them, and I had given them a taste of what I had endured. It wasn't cruel, it was fair. I had survived, and now they were surviving, learning the same lesson they had once ignored. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. The silence, the folders, the reality I had handed them, it was enough. They would remember this moment forever. I walked back into my house, closing the door behind me, feeling a quiet satisfaction. I had given them help, but it was a help they had earned, a mirror of the past they had forced me to face. The sting of reality was more powerful than anger, and justice had arrived in the simplest, coldest way. I stood at the gate and watched as their car slowly drove away. My mother, my father, and Cody were all inside, faces pale and expressions heavy with shock and defeat. They had come expecting sympathy or a way out of their problems, and instead, they had been forced to face the reality they had created for themselves. I didn't feel triumph, and I didn't feel anger. I only felt a deep, quiet peace that I hadn't known in years. For so long, I had carried the weight of their laughter, their scorn, and their rejection. I had remembered every cruel word, every harsh look, every moment they made me feel small. But as I watched the car disappear down the road, I realized I no longer needed to carry it. I had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to let go. I turned and walked back to my home, the place I had built with my own hands, my own effort, and my own determination. Every brick, every window, every corner of this house was a reminder of how far I had come. I reached the heavy oak door and closed it slowly behind me. The sound of it shutting was final, like a signal that the past was no longer in control of my life. Inside, the house was quiet, filled only with the peace I had earned. I walked through the rooms, feeling the strength that had carried me here. The years of struggle, sacrifice, and determination had not been in vain. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had built something lasting from the ashes of my past. I realized then that my life was not defined by their betrayal. It was not defined by their mistakes or the way they had treated me, nor was it defined by the revenge I had delivered. All of that was in the past. What defined me now was my strength, my courage, and my ability to create a future entirely my own. I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to finally feel the freedom that came from knowing I could rely only on myself and still succeed. No one could take this from me. No one could undo the years of work, the sacrifices, or the lessons I had learned. I had built a life that belonged entirely to me, and that knowledge brought a calm I had never felt before. Sitting in the living room, looking out at the hills and the quiet streets beyond, I understood that this was more than just a home. It was a symbol of my independence, my resilience, and my determination. The past no longer held power over me. I had faced it, confronted it, and left it behind. My future was mine to shape, mine to protect, and mine to enjoy. I smiled softly to myself, a small, quiet acknowledgement of all I had achieved. The door was closed on them, on the past, and on the pain they had caused. And now, finally, I could step forward fully into the life I had built, defined not by anyone else, but entirely by me. Do you think Jenna was right to keep her family at a distance and give them help on her terms, or should she have forgiven them? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this.